welcome to another talk in our Caregiving Essentials webinar series. My name is Christine Kennedy, and on behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and McMaster Continuing Education, I'd like to thank you for joining us today as we celebrate the beginning of Pride Month here in Ontario and discuss the topic of caregiving in the gay community with our special guest, Canadian playwright Brad Fraser. Before we begin, I'd like to take this moment to acknowledge the land on which we reside. McMaster University recognizes and acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Before we begin, we do have a few logistics if you're new to our webinar, and if you're not new, welcome back. So you are able to ask questions. We had a number of pre-submitted questions, so thank you for submitting those, and Donna will get to those in the conversation. But if you have a question for today, please put that into the Q&A session. And if you'd like to just make a comment, feel free to put that in the chat, share some of your experiences, but be mindful because the chat is open to the public. Just don't put too much information, private information, since we can all read it. As a reminder, this talk is being recorded, so if you need to head out but want to watch the rest of it at a future time, not a problem. We'll be sending that out early next week. And finally, if you would like to activate the closed captioning feature, just go on to the bottom where it says more, click on that, and then you'll see live transcript, and just click on that, and then you'll see the transcript come up. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our host for the next hour, Donna Thomson. Donna is a caregiver, author, and educator. She is the author of 2 best-selling books on caregiving, including The Unexpected Journey of Caring. Donna also facilitates our free online courses for caregivers, Caregiving Essentials, and she is a co-designer of the Creating Caregiver-Friendly Workplace course and co-designer and co-director of the Family Engagement and Research Program, all of which is here at McMaster. And our special guest today is Brad Fraser, who is the author of many successful plays, including the worldwide hit Unidentified Human Remains and the True Nature of Love and Poor Superman, which I actually had the pleasure of seeing in Toronto when I was a student here at McMaster in 1995. Yes, we did a road trip down to Toronto. Brad's work can also be seen on the big screen, including Love and Human Remains and Leaving Metropolis, and a new film based on his play Kill Me Now will begin filming in November. On the small screen, Brad has produced and written on the groundbreaking TV show Queer as Folk. He does have a degree from U of T, not from McMaster, but we won't hold that against him, and has taught many classes on writing and recently released his memoir, All the Rage, which saw him nominated for an Audie Award for Best Narrator for an audiobook in America, but unfortunately that award was given to Barack Obama.
Who beats me at everything.
And for those of you who enjoy Stratford Festival, maybe you'll remember last year and in the 2023 season, Brad had created a successful and controversial adaptation of Shakespeare's Richard II. Clearly, Brad's artistic abilities and imagination have no limits, and so we're so thrilled that he could take the next hour to be with us. Thank you, Brad, for joining us, and Donna, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Christine. And I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you today, Brad, and to have what I know is going to be such an interesting and rich conversation about caregiving, the history of the AIDS epidemic, and your book, your plays. And just to begin, I'd like to talk a little bit about All the Rage. And here's the image of it. Okay, we're going to get it up in presentation mode, hopefully in a sec. And All the Rage starts with you describing your youth and upbringing, Brad, and your family growing up. I think it was outside Edmonton, is that right? As my memory serves?
Yes, well, outside Edmonton and all over BC as well.
Okay, right. So you had a rough time growing up. And, I know you to be a very, very caring person. You care a lot for and about the people who are close to you in your life. And I wonder, can you describe a little bit about your early life and maybe where did you learn to be caring? Because you didn't receive a lot of caregiving, good modeling back in your youth?
Yeah, well, I think that's, that sort of addresses the question of how much of who we are is born in us innately, and how much do we learn and pick up from the way we're taught and, the people around us and that kind of thing. And I don't put a lot of stock in horoscopes, but I am a Cancer. My birthday is the end of this month, and we're known for being nurturing kind of homebody kind of people, although I do some of that, but I have my other traits as well. But I'm not sure. Like I always was concerned about other people and about the way they felt, and nothing causes me more pain than seeing a person or an animal or someone else in pain or need that are unable to have those needs met. And honestly, I think I've always felt like that. And I then my parents, who were teenagers, couldn't wait to put me in charge of the other children and that kind of thing, and let me pick up their slack, so that there was a kind of caregiving was thrust on me at an early age, if you will. And I took that very seriously and tried to do my best. I mean, I was a kid, but that kind of set the tone for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Well, it's a fantastic book. I absolutely, if you have an interest in theater history, in the in AIDS and the history and how that epidemic shaped the gay community in Canada, and how artists responded to it too, personally and professionally, I highly, highly recommend your book. It's a fascinating read, and literally, I couldn't put it down. I read it almost in one go. Um, so, uh, it's very interesting to me to consider the nature of, well, the nature of theater, the nature of the gay community, and how caregiving intersects with that. Because when I think about, the history of my gay friends in the closet, out of the closet, and I have a theater background too. I was an actor before our son was born, and a director. Of course, all of that stopped in 1988 when he was born. But hence my huge interest in speaking with you and thinking about these things. And you know, I always think of my gay friends as being some of the most caring people in my life. And I sort of think about that because there is this sense of otherness, of being othered, and particularly if you have a painful coming out. Um, and now it's more dangerous than ever, to be gay in our society. And it seems to me that there is a huge amount of caring for each other in the gay community. And I think it's interesting to explore that. And you did in All the Rage, and you did in Poor Superman, your play that you wrote, um, about AIDS, which I also saw in 1995 at the Hampstead Theatre in London,
London.
in the
Yeah.
UK. Um, so maybe you can talk a little bit about Poor Superman and what you were thinking that you wanted to achieve with that play, and what you were thinking about AIDS. Um, and if we could see that slide of the movie, of the play poster, there we are.
Well, it's interesting you say when you talk about the queer community helping one another and supporting one another overall, and there have been, historically that's been there, because when you are othered, when you are an outsider, it's I think it affects most people by making them more aware of the feelings of other people and what's going on around them. But then when we started to learn that there was this new disease that was attacking predominantly gay men at that time, and that it was fatal. It was very disturbing to me that so many straight people were completely uninterested in what it was. When people started dying in the thousands, it was like we had two alternative worlds going on. We had, the straight world where everything was fine, and then we had the gay world where everything was literally falling apart. And it became very clear that nobody was going to do anything to help us, that people were being left in in hospital rooms and not being fed. People were afraid to care for them and medicate them. And so, the community came together and had to start to care for one another and reach out to each other and literally, help one another into hospitals, that bathe one another, take care of one another. And I think that was a watershed moment for the community. And I do remember, I was living in Toronto at the time, and the gay community prior to AIDS was a very exclusive kind of thing. Like, they wouldn't let drag queens into certain bars. You had to look a certain way to fit into the community. There was a very regimented, almost fascistic kind of aesthetic going on at the time. And then AIDS kicked in, and we realized that we weren't a whole bunch of individuals, that we had to be a community, that we had to band together, and that we had to help one another. And all of a sudden, drag queens were allowed into bars, and the look changed. People shaved off their mustaches. They stopped cutting their hair so short. They became more individualistic. And in some ways, the AIDS was the worst thing that happened to the gay community. And in other ways, it was the best thing that happened to the community, because it brought us together and it made us face one another and say, okay, there's that whole culture of no fats, no femmes, no Asians in the gay world, in dating and that kind of thing. And while it still exists, I don't think it's as strong or as influential as it was prior to the beginning of the AIDS pandemic. So when I wrote Poor Superman, which is a play about a well-known painter who has a certain level of success, who's out of touch with his muse and out of touch with the real world. So he kind of anonymously gets a job at a restaurant run by a young couple and ends up involved in a relationship with the husband. And the play is about how it affects the women in their lives. There's a trans woman who is the painter's best friend. There is a fast-talking broad with a hat who's a newspaper columnist who's his other best friend. And then there's the wife of the restaurant owner. And the play for me is very much about how the women respond to what's going on around them. And I wrote it because I wanted to write a play where the straight world and the gay world intersected. I didn't want that kind of exclusive worlds. I wanted to talk about them coming together and how they mix and what happens when that happens, also as a way to make straight people aware of what was going on by bringing them into the story and saying AIDS isn't just a gay problem. AIDS is a worldwide problem. And as we saw, it exploded all over the world and affected a lot more people than just the gay community. But the idea that that straight people and gay people had to fight this thing together, and also that this trans character who was literally trapped between genders because she couldn't get the medical change that she needed, the sex change that she needed because of her HIV status, that trapped her in this world that was literally in between life and death, in between male and female, and in between straight and gay. So it was very much about that liminal space where we meet one another and often don't talk about it. So that's what it was for me. And it talked about a lot of things that we weren't allowed to talk about at the time, like straight men who have sex with other men and that kind of thing. And that's a fairly common thing going on. So it is, to my mind, a much better play than Unidentified Human Remains and the True Nature of Love. But because it is so tied to that particular point in history, it's a very hard play to produce now. You know what I mean? That it is so much about that people can't really relate to it anymore. Whereas at the time, we were all in the midst of it and we were dealing with it. We were immersed in it.
Mm-hmm. But I think people listening to our conversation today, Brad, are going to get this, maybe more than most, because we are faced, many of us who are sort of in the trenches of caring for other people who may be aging, may be ill, maybe have had some catastrophic accident or something. We are in that liminal space. We are between life and death. We're faced with mortality. We are very isolated. So there's a lot of othering that we experience, not because of overt discrimination or anything. It's just simply that the role is all consuming oftentimes, and it's very isolating. So I think just listening to you describe what you were going for in writing that play, and I'm just thinking in my head, I really, really get that. And this idea that being faced with these, um, you know, faced with mortality, and having to band together to figure out how to put one foot in front of the other without really having any kind of certainty about the future and whether there will be a future does bring people together. I think that's why we can have conversations here that most other people cannot.
Right.
Um, yeah. Um, which brings me to another play that you wrote that is deeply, deeply meaningful for me personally, because I am the mother of two grown children, but our son Nicholas, who's 36 now, um, has very severe physical disabilities. He's non-speaking. He We ran a home ICU type setting for him for 23 years, um, and looked after him until he moved into a medical group home. And you wrote this play, which I saw, I think it was 2018, or I can't remember the year, but I saw the show at the National Arts Center in Ottawa. And Brad, tell us about this play. And anyone listening is going to then really understand why it hit me like, really hard.
Well, Kill Me Now was is one of those plays that I didn't want to write, but I felt I had to. It was a very painful experience to do. And I mean, it comes partially from someone that I know quite well who deals with, as you do, Donna, with a disabled child and how difficult that can be and the many issues that come up. But also, I remember reading in the Toronto Star in an ethics column in probably the late 80s, like a long time ago, a letter from a father who had a severely disabled son who was going through adolescence, who was unable to masturbate. And when the father was bathing the son, he would get erections. And it was very clear that this was becoming painful and problematic for the child. And the child didn't want anyone else to know. He had this very intimate relationship with his father who bathed him, who cleaned his foreskin, who wiped his ass, who did all those things that we do for our disabled children that are highly intimate acts. And so the question was, if I masturbate my disabled son, am I stepping over a line, or does that fall into the same kind of maintenance, excuse me, of the boy that I do normally? And I thought, wow, like how many people will ever have to ask that question? And how do you answer that question? How do you answer a question that is that difficult and that idiosyncratic to who the personalities are, and what are the ethics of that, which I often ask myself when I'm writing. So that was the impetus to look at this play and ask some really, really difficult questions. And it also, I grew up with a very bad father, with an abusive father, and this play allowed me to create a non-abusive father, to create a loving, caring father for the child, but also for myself to a certain degree as the writer. And so the other interesting thing about it is there is not a whiff of anything gay in it, because there can't be any sense of eroticism between the father and son for the question to work. So it was a very fine line to walk, and it makes people very uncomfortable. I mean, there are parts of the play that for me are impossible to watch, where I cry every time I see them, because that level of sacrifice and that level of intimacy shared between these two people. And again, Don, I don't have to tell you, because you know this firsthand, how difficult that can be. So the attempt to capture that and pose those questions, and then something else happens in the play I don't want to give away in the second half that makes things even more difficult. The idea of how far are we willing to go for love? How much are we willing to sacrifice? Which is really the theme for all of and for everything I write. In this play is, I think, stronger than it is in any of the other pieces that I've written.
Yeah. And what I think this question of what are the limits and what are what are ethical limits, but what are your personal limits? Many people who are in the caregiving role, for example, once their loved one becomes incontinent, that's it. That's the line in the sand when some people just cannot deal. I think if you're caring for your child um, with high needs, first of all, the issue of young adolescents growing up, discovering their sexuality as individuals with very severe disabilities. Oh, this is a huge, huge heartache for parents. And I talk to people who are caring for their spouse too, where people worry. Of course we do. We worry about wanting so much for someone we love to be happy, to be their whole self, to be fully human despite so many challenges. And sexuality is part of humanity. Um, and it just makes me think we need a whole other webinar on this topic because it's so important and people don't talk about it. But so I thought, it was a very, very important play for everybody because, I mean, what's going to happen to us when we age? And we'll get to that conversation on a more personal level shortly, but um, you know, who's going to help us be our whole selves as we age and maybe have dependency needs? I think it's basically a human question, and it's a massive responsibility for caregivers. Um, and one that we might want to shy away from and maybe not think about, but people do think about it and I think worry about it.
And you have to. I mean, you have to think about it because part of with the creation of Joey, the disabled boy in the play, I wanted to talk about the sexuality of disabled people. I wanted to talk about not turning them into saints, not turning them into cliches, which is what we tend to do in popular culture. And he's a very unlikable character for the first half of the play. He's a very difficult to love kind of kid. And I think it's really important that people know and understand that being disabled doesn't make you a saint. It doesn't make you
No.
a good person. In fact, sometimes it can have quite the opposite effect. And that I didn't want to fall into that trap of othering the person who's already othered even more by placing an expectation to be special on them, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I sure know.
Yeah, yeah.
And everybody listening knows that too. Like, yeah, and there's so many labels that people with dependency needs and their caregivers, you're a saint, you're a warrior, all this nonsense. But there is a great deal of humanity in that play. Um, and which brings me to uh, Shirley. Shirley was your neighbor. And um, can you tell us about Shirley and her little dog, Shadow? We're going to see a picture of Shirley in a second so everybody can know who it is that we're talking about here. Um, and there she is. And I have never met her personally, but I came to know her well through your daily Facebook posts. Can you introduce us to Shirley and how you came to meet her and care for her?
Sure. Excuse me. I used to run into this woman who I thought was probably in her 60s. She was very stylish. She had this little cockadoodle, little black cockadoodle named Shadow, and she was in the elevator, and she was a very talkative woman. She spoke to everybody, and she was funny and friendly, and always had a big hello for everyone. And we started up a kind of chatting in the elevator kind of friendship. as you do in big cities, in high rises. And one day I was coming home from something and I saw her. She had Shadow out in the yard, and he had just taken a poo, and she was trying to lean over to pick it up with her plastic bag, and I could see she was in pain doing it. And I said, "Are you all right?" And she said, "Oh, she'd fallen down or something," and hurt her back and was having trouble taking care of Shadow. And I said, "Well, let me do that for you." And I took the plastic bag and I picked his poo up and I threw it away. And we talked for a bit. And I said, "Well, do you need someone to walk him for you? Like here, he needs to go out 2 or 3 times a day. If you need a hand with that, I can help you. I like dogs, and I don't have a dog. I have a cat. And so the contact with dogs would be great." And she said, "Oh, that would be very nice. I would love it if you would do that, if you don't mind." And so I started walking her dog for her while she was recuperating. And it became very clear when I bring the dog back, I was being very Toronto, "Here's your dog, I gotta go, no time to talk." And she'd be, "No, no, stay, have a beer, let's talk." And it was clear to me she was lonely. And so I would stay and I would talk to her and I sort of got her backstory and that kind of thing. And then one day she said to me, "I was talking to someone out on the lawn and you're a writer. I didn't know you're a writer." And I said, "Yes, I've written some stuff. And would you mind if I write about you a bit? Because I'm walking Shadow and I'd like to talk on Facebook about Shadow and helping out neighbors and that kind of thing." And she said, "Yeah, I have no problem with that, of course." And so I did, and it was just very much about the dog mostly to begin with. But then I started to notice um, she wouldn't be there when we'd made a plan for me to show up. I would go up to get the dog, and she wouldn't be there. And I started to get angry because, I was giving up time for this, and she wasn't honoring that. And so I one day said to her, I'm kind of upset. I don't want to keep doing this." She said, "Well, here's a key. You can come and get Shadow whenever you want. Sometimes I forget things." And it hadn't occurred to me up until that point. She seemed like someone of her age, which I found out was actually much older than I thought she was. She was in her late 70s, early 80s at the time, and looked terrific, great physical shape. And then one of her friends, she didn't have very many. She's a lesbian, and she'd been with a partner who had died. I sort of got that out of her, and most of her friends were around her age and were either dead or dying or in different places. And she was very much on her own. And her closest friend, who lived 4 hours away, would come in and see her from time to time and pulled me aside and said, "Shirley has dementia. I don't know if you've gleaned that yet, but she's got mild dementia and it's getting worse." And I was, oh, a lot of things make sense now that you tell me that. Like a lot of things make sense. And he said, "Do you mind looking in on her?" And I thought, well, no, I've been looking in on her already anyway, so I'll keep doing it. And somehow through that, I became basically her lone caregiver because her only other friend was so far away. So I started taking her to doctor's appointments. I started taking her for daily walks so that she would feel better. I took complete care of her. And when I started to do that, and I had clear boundaries of things I would and wouldn't do. Um, she got sick one day and had to be rushed to the hospital. She was having an asthma attack and they had to put her in a tent and they drugged her and she was kind of delirious. And when I brought her home, she couldn't get into bed. So I ended up having to undress her and put her in her pajamas and get her into bed. And I thought, I would never do this. I told myself I would never ever do this, but there's no one else to do it for her. And so as she got worse, I had to make a decision. I thought, "Okay, Brad, are you going to commit to this or are you going to back away?" Because it's a very, very big commitment and there's nobody else around who can do it. So you don't really have a choice. So I did. And she said to me one day, she said, "If anything happened to me, would you take Shadow?"
Mm.
And I could tell that was really important to her. So I said, yes, I would. And so ended up for the next 5 years being her caregiver and trying to alleviate not only the issues with her memory, but also her loneliness. And what can we do with gay seniors who are at that age, who have outlived everyone around them?
Yeah.
What can we give them that can keep them engaged with life as it's going on? And I found a number of things. I mean, there were resources. The city was very good about sending over counselors and people to deal with her. Her doctor was really great. There was a program. a day program that I got her into where they would pick her up on the bus every morning and take her away, and she would do activities and that kind of thing. And then she'd come home in the evening and I'd be there to greet her and bring her up and feed her and shop for her and that kind of thing. But eventually, she went away. It became too much. She became, it was during the pandemic too, so things were even worse because now I've got this woman who is so social, who Shadow got sick and I had to take him and have him put down because she was not capable of doing it, and I didn't want her to emotionally be experiencing what was going on. So once Shadow was gone, she started to deteriorate very, very quickly and started to act out and do very odd things. And then her roommate that she had been sharing this place with, who lived in another country and only came during the summer, couldn't afford to pay anymore, so we had to move her into another apartment. All this time we're waiting for a placement for her in a long-term care home. And it had been actually the guy who had her power of attorney had been trying to get her into one for 6 years, and we wanted to get her into one when she was still cognizant enough that she could enjoy being around other people and that kind of thing. But it took so long that she was almost gone when she finally got there. And so those 5 years of my life, which were devoted almost exclusively to caring for Shirley, are 5 years I really treasure, that I really feel like I had a purpose that was bigger than myself, that I had something to do that was important. And I shared it on social media. As you know, I shared everything that she was comfortable with. And I had asked her when she was still well enough to give permission, but it created a community of people who supported me as well as Shirley. And I really needed that support because other people weren't there and didn't really understand. And so whenever I told a Shirley story or a Shadow story, I got a great reaction from it. When Shadow was sick, we did a fundraiser and people sent thousands of dollars to care for Shadow that went to Shirley. And then on her, I think it was her 84th birthday, I said, if you have the time, could you please send Shirley a card? And here's the address. Please send her a card. And we got, I think, 500 cards from all over the world. We got flowers, we got gifts, we got all these wonderful things. And Shirley was like, who are these people? Where is this stuff coming from? And her mail person was like, what the hell is going on here? Like, this is ridiculous. I'm delivering a box of mail every day. But that the outpouring of love and support that came from that, from humanizing Shirley and talking about her situation and what she was going through on social media, I think was really important. And I heard from many, many other people who were going through the same thing with their parents or someone in their life who just said, thank you so much for making us visible, for letting people know what it's like, for what you do for Shirley. And I think that idea that there can be a community on a forum that is usually so toxic and can be so negative was really, for me, really made me happy. It really made me feel like, okay, I'm not totally wasting my time on Facebook. There's some other stuff going on here that's constructive as well. And just to wrap that up, I mean, now we eventually got Shirley into a placement, and it's 4 hours away from Toronto. I haven't been able to go and see her since she left. And when she first left, she would call me in the middle of the night and beg me to get in a taxi and come and get her and bring her home, that she'd be good. And I had to explain to her that I couldn't do that and why I couldn't do that. And then, and it's interesting, the guy with her power of attorney didn't want the people in the extended care home to know that Shirley was gay. And Shirley actually forgot that she was a lesbian. And at one point thought she was married to me and that her PSW was trying to steal her from me. And she literally forgot that she was gay. And I thought that is a profound thing. That is such a part of her personality and who she is. And it's gone away. But when she got to the extended care home, which is in a smaller town, they were concerned that she would be ostracized or even attacked or something for being a lesbian. And so she had a copy of All the Rage that I gave her when it first came out that she was so proud of. She never read it. She was beyond that point then, but she would show it to everyone. And they had to take it away from her because it connected her to me and made it very clear that she was from the gay community. And so when we talk about how are things different for gay seniors, how are things different for queer seniors, trans seniors, that kind of thing, I mean, we have to be very careful in realizing that being a senior doesn't necessarily make people more accepting or make people more open or make them more loving. And there still are very strong dangers and issues that have to be dealt with. And in a way, I sort of feel like it's kind of lucky that Shirley forgot that she was a lesbian, that she had a new start, that she had a new life. And sadly, now she is almost completely comatose. She can't speak. She doesn't move. They have her on a kind of slant board and they feed her when they can, but she is she's being warehoused. She's being warehoused until she dies. And that's what's going on all over the place, in all over the world, all over the country, certainly all over Canada, that these elderly people that can't function anymore are just being warehoused until they die. And what breaks my heart is Shirley's mother also died of dementia, of Alzheimer's, and she lived to be 98. You know,
Oh,
Shirley turned 90 last year. The idea of her having another 8 years with that kind of existence really breaks my heart, but it also really makes me think we've got to be able to decide what we want done with us when this happens. We cannot be at the mercy of the state or the government or our families to say, oh, we got to keep it. Like, when I don't recognize the people that I love anymore, I don't care how happy I seem, I don't care how content I am, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be a drain on the system. I don't want to be a drain on my loved ones. If I'm at that state, I would like to have assisted suicide. And I would like the right to say that now and have it executed then. Because I think it's really important. And when I look at Shirley and other people like Shirley, I just think she wouldn't want to be like this. She
mhm.
wouldn't want to if she knew what is going on right now, she would want to be not this.
Yeah.
But her generation never, they weren't even allowed to consider those kind of questions. You know, certainly Shirley wasn't, from that, you know, Judeo-Christian background that she has. It never would have even come up. She probably would have said no, but I'm not Shirley, and I would like to be able to say that is not what I want in my future.
Right. Yeah, you know, we did do, I think it was last year, we did a webinar on medical assistance in dying in Canada. And it was a very interesting conversation. And I suspect that advance directives for MAID are probably coming in Canada. Canada is currently the most um, open, um, you know, in terms of the regulations that govern this, who gets to access MAID. We are the most open country in the world currently. And I think the Canadian population seems to want to um, go in this direction. So, um, you know, it's so interesting. I didn't know that Shirley forgot that she was gay. Because I was one of those that was following your Facebook posts about her every day, sent her a birthday card and pictures of my dog. I figured she likes dogs. And but it also strikes me, and I'm shocked and quite horrified that the home where she lives, we're afraid that she might be attacked or isolated on the basis of her sexuality. That's terrible. But I wonder if Shirley just loves you, Brad. I mean, and she's thinking that you were this very special person to her. You cared for her. And so maybe she's just has love in her heart. Maybe it's as simple as that. Um, and I just wonder if I was losing, um, you know, reality in my head, but I knew somebody loved me and I loved them. I might, it's not very hard to transfer that to a romantic relationship, no matter what sex they are. It's about love and caring and love and necessity, right?
Right. Right. Something comes up to me as we talk about this, and we talk about MAID and Canada's openness to it. I mean, and again, we both have people in our lives who uh, some people might think don't have a place in this society. And I think we have to be really careful and we have to be really clear that MAID can never be a way to get rid of people who are inconvenient. That
No.
um, and there are people who believe that our government is pushing toward that rather than coming up with ways to properly support and feed and care for a lot of these people, that they're easier just to get rid of, to offer them assisted suicide rather than a better quality of life. And I know some people who are listening to this will be going there immediately. And I know even from Kill Me Now, which also deals with the question of euthanasia, particularly when you're dealing with people with disabilities, you have to be very, very careful because they don't necessarily fall into the same school of thought as healthy people, relatively healthy people who are considering this if something they're in some kind of a state, So I just really want to make it clear that MAID can be a really great thing for some people, but it can never be used as an excuse to get rid of people who are inconvenient, that we have to care for our sick, our disabled, our elderly in the most compassionate fashion that we can and not offer them a way out simply because they're inconvenient. I just wanted to sort of tack that on there.
Yes, thank you for saying that. I couldn't agree more. Um, Disability in and of itself does not equal suffering. And people with disabilities are fully human. I wrote my first book all about these things. Yeah. Um, but I wonder, Brad, as we've got a few minutes left, and I really want to explore what you think people in the queer community need in the way of aging and caregiving. And what do you have any plans for yourself or um
I
and
just plan to work till I die.
what's good care for people in the queer community?
Well, I think in the case of Shirley, I have to say the thing that seemed to bolster her the most was the social event, were the social events that happened, that going to Dixon Hall, having a place in the morning to go and be with other people who were dealing with the same sort of situations, who were in the same age group, and actually having activities, whether it was singing, whether it was storytelling, whether it was some kind of craft they were doing, that kind of fellowship and creative activity helped her so much and made her so happy when she was doing it. I mean, by the time she got home, I would say, what did you do? And she would have no idea. She completely forgot. But in talking to the people who worked with her on an almost daily basis, which I did, and dropping in a couple of times to see what was going on, the general level of happiness among the people who were there, among the seniors who were being facilitated, was really encouraging. And the problem I have, the issue with Shirley was she was sitting in a big old apartment by herself, looking at the television. And once Shadow was gone, she had nothing. At least when she had Shadow, she had an excuse to go take him out for a walk 5 times a day and talk to people in the elevator and talk to other dog walkers and that kind of thing, as people with dogs do. But once that was gone, there was really nothing there for her. So this time at Dixon Hall, which is a program for seniors here in Toronto, was really, really important. That kind of filling time rather than just marking it, I think, is very important. And I think that the recognition that a lot of queer people don't have children and won't have children, or are estranged from their children, or are estranged from their families, that has to be taken into consideration as well. And that there is a different kind of feeling to being a queer senior. I mean, you've always been on the outside anyway. And then, we put our seniors on the outside regardless of their sexuality. But when they come from an alternative sexuality, they're even farther on the outside. So it takes a longer reach to reach out to them and bring them in and try to make them part of the community or try to make them part of some kind of group dynamic so they're not isolated, because it's the isolation, I think, that is the worst thing for any senior, but particularly for queer seniors.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more because, um, you know, I think we need to look at models of good care for the particular needs of the queer community. And Mary in the chat has put an exemplary example of a really effective support that happens to be in Chicago. But it seems to me that this is something that I think people need to organize around and advocate for the particular types of support that we need, that people in the queer community need that are different from what's on offer to the general population. I think at the very least, people should feel safe going into long-term care and not have to say, um, I'm not gay, or, I'm not Armenian, or whatever the heck it is that you are. Like, what the heck? I thought we were, beyond that. But on the other hand, I read all the time about how, um, oh, people feel unleashed in institutional settings to be their worst selves sometimes, and to be very discriminatory based on their cultural beliefs, based on their religious beliefs, or whatever it may be. I Do you have any ideas on how do we address this?
Well, I think some of the steps are being taken already. I know they're looking at queer housing and queer themed extended care homes and that kind of thing for people who are in the community and who are also in need of care. And I think that that's really important. Although I do also worry about ghettoization and, again, putting people into one class as opposed to teaching people to be more tolerant of one another and letting them mingle. I've always felt a completely gay world or a completely queer world is very dangerous to fantasize about, because yes, it keeps us safe, but I think we have an obligation to interact with the larger world. I think that queer people have things to teach straight people about how to live and how to survive, and particularly as you get older and doing it on your own and doing it as an outsider, that's very important and something that people can be shared. Someone had a note came up about gay housing and facilities and that kind of thing. And that's only starting to happen now because my generation, so few of us got to be old, that so few of us survived to get to this point. I'm going to be 66 at the end of this month, and literally have watched most of the people I know in my gay world die and disappear in a way that I don't think anybody who hasn't been through a war can ever really completely understand that level of loss that's gone on. So I think particularly for my generation who survived the people who survived the AIDS crisis, we're asking some really hard questions now about what comes next. What do we do? And a lot of that stuff, a lot of those ideas and that care is based on things we learned from the AIDS crisis. And the other thing is, it's really important that there's an intergenerational interface between older queer people and younger queer people, or just younger people. It doesn't matter if they're queer or not, particularly now where gender and sexuality and all that is becoming even more of a kaleidoscope and less defined than it was when we were young people, for example. That we have things to teach them and they have things to teach us, and they have ways of helping us as well. It makes me think of my friend Spencer, who I met in university when I was doing my master's 12, 13 years ago, who is straight and who is 35 years younger than me. But we have such an amazing relationship in terms of what we give each other, what we exchange, the ways he helps me and the way I help him. They're very different, and yet they're really important. So if there's some way to foster more of that intergenerational kind of exchange between the older and the younger people, or even between, Shirley, I was in my 50s and early 60s when I was helping Shirley, who was in her 80s, like those relationships, and especially for a lot of us who had difficult relationships with our parents and that kind of thing, they're very important, I think, in terms of creating a stronger, more compassionate, more intelligent society that we do consciously teach one another.
Oh, absolutely. It's so interesting because I think a lot about how to kind of almost have a victory garden approach to neighborhood at a neighborhood level of creating these and supporting intentionally these intergenerational relationships that are so helpful to everybody. Um, and I think it's a really hard nut to crack. Um, I think, for example, could there have been something formalized that would have been more than just accidental of you meeting Shirley in the elevator and you beginning this a relationship with her? I mean, the asset-based community development programs that exist in some lower income communities where people go door to door. What do you know how to do? What are you willing to teach somebody else? What's your free time? Would you visit so and so? Or something like that. But I don't know. It's very hard human work to get people to together to have a conversation. Um, and I think this idea, though, of lots of young people really need good examples
Yes,
and
yes,
mentoring.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and there are a lot of there are a lot of I think similarities between how you describe um, aging in the queer community with aging with a disability.
Yes.
And we worry a lot that we will die before Nicholas does. And then because we broker a lot of his relationships and his friendships, he has many friends. Um, but it's the parents, it's the caregivers who kind of keep that going. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't know who's going to do that when we're not here.
Well,
Uh,
that's the biggest question, isn't it? I mean, that really is the most heartbreaking question is what happens after I'm gone? Like when you're invested and it's your child or it's someone you love, uh, you want to know that someone's going to be there, but you have no control over that. I mean, it's the same thing when you let them go to further care places. When I had to let Shirley go to the extended care home
yeah.
because I couldn't care for her anymore. I mean, I was changing her diapers. I was dealing with her smearing shit on the wall. I was dealing with her flooding the apartment because she forgot to turn the tap off. I was dealing with things that I finally had to say, I can't do this anymore. And I know every parent of a disabled child, as they become an adult, reaches that same point where they say, I can't do this anymore. Not just because you maybe physically can't do it, but also because we all need a break, right? We
Yeah.
all need a life as well as what you're doing there. So that's a very difficult moment. That's a very difficult thing to do. And I really feel for anybody at that point because the guilt, I know the guilt that comes with it, no matter how well you can arrange for them to be cared for, never really goes away. But at the same time, if you burn out, if you become angry, if you become depressed, if it has a physical or emotional or physical effect on you, then you're not doing yourself or the person you're caring for any favors.
No, no, that's true. Um, it's very interesting, though. I think so. How do you achieve well-being in amongst everybody who are part of these dyads or triads of care? Um, it, it's it, it's a huge question. It's going to get more urgent, I think, as our whole population ages. Um, and I think, though, what you're talking about in terms of friendship, support, meaning and purpose and joy, because you laughed with Shirley a lot. to. We need to figure out how to get this for everybody, including people who have been on the margins, who feel like outsiders in our society. So I guess we're coming up to the top of the hour and we only have a few minutes left, but I know that right now the Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence has kickstarted um, a national caregiving strategy, and it is in the government's budget. If you could talk to um, uh, Patty Hajdu, who's going to be the minister responsible for implementing this, about what the feds could do for people in the gay and the queer community who need or give care. Can you think of what you would say? I hate to put you on the spot, but if you have some ideas.
Well, funds for the kind of things that I've been talking about, to care for them, just moving Shirley from her apartment to a doctor's appointment, for example, became very difficult as her body became stiffer, as she became older, and as she became more confused. If there was a way to be able to phone someone who understood these things rather than a cab driver who's getting mad at you because this elderly woman wants to pay with her charge card, or because it's taking her 10 minutes to get into the taxi, or whatever it is. If there were ways to do just the practical things, to go, I would have to go shopping for Shirley once a week and fill up a cart with groceries that I would have to drag home. And I'm not a young man anymore,
Yeah.
So it was a difficult thing. So help with just the practical things, and then help with socializing people, of creating places and events where people can come together, and they don't even have to socialize. They just be together, watch a movie, with Shirley, music was such an amazing part of what connected us, that when I would show her a movie, that she would not remember anything, but she could remember every lyric to West Side Story and sing along with it, and she would just come to life. And one of the most joyful things I got after she had left and gone to the long-term care home is she couldn't speak on the phone anymore. She couldn't have a coherent conversation. But one of her friends sent me footage of her in the talent show singing My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. And she did it perfectly the entire time. And so the joy of seeing that old Shirley come out through music, which we know has a major effect on people with Alzheimer's, those kind of joy-inducing events are really, really important. And we need more people to facilitate those, and more people to bring them out and get them together, and more people just to run the whole thing for them and take them home at the end of it.
I love that. I really love that. And just to, finish off, I also, am reminded that the storytelling, the power of music, theater, film, poetry, you writing about Shirley, caring for Shirley on Facebook, these stories, I think, gave people who didn't know Shirley, but also had never had a caregiving role in their lives and normally would have gone, no way, not for me. Um, it made people feel as though, oh, I could do that. I could do that. And the reason they felt that way is you introduced them to Shirley. So I could do that for somebody I know. And they can begin to imagine themselves doing these things that you did. And that's huge. That is a civic contribution. So,
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. And a big part of why I did it so publicly is to say to people, and I actually said this, seek someone out in your building, find a neighbor, find a senior, find somebody that needs your help, that maybe you just go to the store for them once a week. Maybe you just walk them around the block, maybe whatever you do. It's not just for them. This enriches us. The caregivers are given, in a way, greater gifts than the people that they're caring for in what they're doing. And part of what I miss about Shirley is that feeling of doing something for someone else and how good that can make you feel.
Oh, I'm with you 100%. Brad, thank you so much for this rich conversation. I've loved it, and I know that from the conversation in the chat that others have too. Where can people find you, Brad, if they want to know more about your writing and work?
You can find me on Facebook. I've got a website. I think it's still up. I mean, websites seem terribly antiquated now, but it's bradfraser.net. And I'm around, just come on to Facebook, check me out, read my book, read my plays, and, call your local artistic director and ask them why they haven't done any Brad Fraser plays recently, particularly the play about Shirley called Shelley's Shadow that
I
opened in
forgot to mention that.
Yes,
Of course,
that
you
opened
turned
in
Shirley into
Catskill,
a
New
play.
York 2 years ago and still hasn't been done in Canada. And it's a very good play.
It is. I was lucky enough to be an early reader, and it is a wonderful play. And we get to see Shirley have a second life and Shadow too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yes,
Thank you,
thank you
Donna.
so much.
It's always a wonder to talk to you. I enjoy it very much every time.
Oh, thank you. Me too. Over to you, Christine.
Thank you, Donna and Brad. And it's interesting because I have the opportunity to do lots of webinars. Brad, you were saying that really when you do things for other people, that really fulfills you. And we've done a number of talks with psychologists, not clinical psychologists, but research psychologists. And that is one of the primary drivers of fundamental happiness. It's not how many cars or yachts or how much you're getting paid. It's what purpose you fulfill in your life and what you do for other people. And that is what really, that really is what provides us happiness. And so you must be very happy, Brad, a very happy person.
I do my best.
You have lots of generosity and creativity in those fingers and brain of yours. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I want to see, I'm not on Facebook. I'm on social media. So I missed the whole Shirley, story. So I want to see it in a play. So I think we need to lobby Theatre Aquarius here in Hamilton.
Yeah, well, it's 3 people, no set, and it's easy to do. So lobby away. I'd appreciate it.
Okay, there we go. So thanks everyone for joining us today, for your contributions in the chat, especially you, Mary. You put lots of things in. This is our final talk for this series for the 24-25. We are coming back in September, so look to your inbox sort of late August, early September, when we'll be announcing our upcoming 25-26 series. So in the meantime, we hope you have a wonderful summer, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for joining us today and for all the other events that you have attended over the last 10 months or so. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you soon.